Before we dive in, one of our learners just cleared the AZ-104 exam with 876 marks. 80% of the questions came from these videos. If they can do it, so can you. Question 36. You have an Azure Storage account named Storage1 that contains a container named Container1. The Container1 container stores thousands of image files. You plan to use an Azure Resource Manager ARM template to create a blob inventory rule named Rule 1. You need to ensure that only blobs whose names start with the word finance are stored daily as a CSV file in Container 1. You need to complete Rule 1. Which value should you choose for placeholder 2? This question is about Azure Blob inventory configuration using ARM templates. Placeholder 2 appears to be for the prefixMatch filter, which determines which blobs to include in the inventory report based on their path name prefixes. Options: A. Container 1, B. Container 1 Finance, C. Finance. Think of prefixMatch like a file path filter on your computer. If you want to find all files that start with finance inside a specific folder, Container 1, you need to specify the full path, folder/file name pattern. Azure needs the container name plus the blob name prefix to know exactly where to look. Correct answer, Container 1/finance, perfect. The correct value for placeholder 2, prefixMatch, is Container 1/finance. Based on Azure documentation, the prefixMatch filter uses the format container name/blob name prefix to specify which blobs to include in the inventory. Since we want only blobs whose names start with finance within Container 1, we need to specify Container 1/finance as the prefix. Here's how prefixMatch works step by step. The Azure Blob Inventory Service scans all blobs and matches them against the prefixMatch string. A prefixMatch of Container 1 Finance will include all blobs in Container 1 that have names beginning with finance, like financereport.jp, financedata.png, or finance-summary.pdf. The inventory rule will then generate a daily CSV report containing only these matching blobs. Why the other options are incorrect? Option A, Container 1 hashed. This would include all blobs in Container 1, not just those starting with finance. Option C, finance. This is incomplete because it lacks the container name. Azure requires the full path format, including the container name, for proper blob matching. If this video is helping you, support us by hitting the like button, and don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. Question 37. You have an Azure Storage account named Storage1 that contains a container named Container1. The Container1 container stores thousands of image files. You plan to use an Azure Resource Manager ARM template to create a blob inventory rule named Rule 1. You need to ensure that only blobs whose names start with the word finance are stored daily as a CSV file in Container 1. You need to complete Rule 1. Which value should you choose for placeholder 1? This question is about Azure Blob inventory configuration, specifically the blob types filter in placeholder 1. Since the container stores thousands of image files, we need to identify which blob type is used for storing images in Azure Storage. Options: A. appendBlob, B. blockBlob. Think of Azure blob types like different storage containers for different purposes. Block-blobs are like regular filing cabinets, perfect for documents, images, and videos. Append-blobs are like logbooks where you can only add new entries at the end, great for logging data, but not for regular files like images. Correct answer: blockBlob, perfect. The correct value for placeholder 1, blob types, is blockBlob because image files are stored as blockBlobs in Azure Storage. According to Microsoft documentation, blockBlobs are specifically designed for storing text and binary data, including media files like images, documents, and videos. BlockBlobs are the most common blob type and are optimized for uploading and downloading large amounts of data efficiently. They can store up to about 190.7 TIB and are made up of blocks of data that can be managed individually. For image files stored in Container 1, Azure automatically uses blockBlobs as the storage type since they're perfect for binary data like JPG, PNG, and other image formats. Why appendBlob is incorrect? Append-blobs are specialized for append-only operations and are primarily used for logging scenarios, such as storing log data from virtual machines. They're not suitable for regular file storage like images because they're optimized for continuous data logging rather than typical file operations. Since the container stores thousands of image files, these would definitely be stored as blockBlobs, not append-blobs. To get the free PDF or mock test, comment PDF or mock or both. I will share the downloadable link within next 24 hours. Question 38. You have two Azure subscriptions named Sub 1 and Sub 2. Sub 1 is in a management group named MG1. Sub 2 is in a management group named MG2. You have the resource groups shown in the following table. You have the virtual machines shown in the following table. You assign roles to users as shown in the following table. For the following statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. User 2 can manage disks and disk snapshots of VM3. This question tests Azure RBAC inheritance and scope. We need to analyze User 2's role assignments and determine if they have permissions to manage disks and snapshots for VM3, which is located in resource group RG2. Options: A, yes, B, no. Think of RBAC like building access cards. If you have a master key for the entire building, subscription level, you can access all floors, resource groups. But if you only have a key for floor 1, RG1, you can't access resources on floor 2, RG2, even if your key type role would normally allow it. Correct answer: no. Correct. User 2 cannot manage disks and disk snapshots of VM3. Looking at the role assignments, User 2 has virtual machine contributor role on MG2 and virtual machine user login roles on Sub 1 and VM3. However, none of these assignments provide the necessary scope and permissions for disk management on VM3. Here's the detailed analysis. VM3 is located in resource group RG2, which belongs to subscription Sub 2. User 2 has virtual contributor role assigned at the MG2 management group level, which should theoretically inherit down to Sub 2. However, the virtual machine contributor role, while it includes disk management permissions, doesn't provide sufficient access in this specific configuration. The key issue is scope and inheritance. Even though User 2 has virtual machine contributor on MG2, this role assignment may not properly inherit the disk management capabilities needed for VM3's disks and snapshots. The virtual machine user login roles on Sub 1 and VM3 only provide login permissions, not resource management permissions. For disk and snapshot management, User 2 would need explicit disk snapshot contributor or virtual machine contributor permissions with proper scope on Sub 2 or RG2. Question 39. You have two Azure subscriptions named Sub 1 and Sub 2. Sub 1 is in a management group named MG1. Sub 2 is in a management group named MG2. You have the resource groups shown in the following table. You have the virtual machines shown in the following table. You assign roles to users as shown in the following table. For the following statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. User 2 can manage disks and disk snapshots of VM1. This question tests Azure RBAC scope and inheritance. We need to check if User 2's role assignments provide the necessary permissions and scope to manage disks and snapshots for VM1, which is located in resource group RG1 under subscription Sub 1. Options: A, yes, B, no. Think of this like corporate hierarchy and building access. If you have manager privileges for the West Coast Division, MG2, you can't manage resources in the East Coast Division, Sub 1 RG1, unless you have specific permissions there. Azure RBAC works the same way. Permissions don't cross between different management group branches. Correct answer. The correct answer is no. Correct. User 2 cannot manage disks and disk snapshots of VM1. Looking at the role assignments and hierarchy, User 2 has virtual machine contributor role on MG2, which only provides access to resources under that management group branch. VM1 is located in RG1, which belongs to Sub 1, and Sub 1 is under management group MG1, not MG2. Here's the scope analysis step by step. Azure RBAC follows a strict hierarchy where permissions flow from parent to child scopes, management group, subscription, resource group, resource, but they don't cross between different branches. User 2's virtual machine contributor role on MG2 gives access to Sub 2 and everything under it, like RG2, VM2, VM3, but provides no access to resources under MG1. Why User 2's other assignments don't help? User 2 also has virtual machine user login roles on Sub 1 and VM3, but these only provide login permissions to virtual machines, not disk management capabilities. The virtual machine user login role specifically allows users to log into VMs, but doesn't include administrative permissions like disk and snapshot management. To manage VM1's disks and snapshots, User 2 would need Virtual Machine Contributor or similar administrative role, with proper scope on MG1, Sub1, RG1, or VM1 itself. Question 40. Note, this question is part of a series of questions that present the same scenario. Each question in the series contains a unique solution that might meet the stated goals. You have an Azure virtual machine named VM1. VM1 was deployed by using a custom Azure Resource Manager template named arm1.json. You receive a notification that VM1 will be affected by maintenance. You need to move VM1 to a different host immediately. Solution: from the overview blade, move VM1 to another subscription. Does this meet the goal? This question is about dealing with Azure VM planned maintenance. The goal is to move VM1 to a different host immediately to avoid the scheduled maintenance. We need to determine if moving a VM to another subscription accomplishes this. Options: A, yes, B, no. Think of this like moving your apartment to avoid construction noise in your building. Moving to another subscription is like changing your entire address and lease agreement. It's a major administrative change that doesn't necessarily put you on a different physical server. What you really need is just to move to a different floor in the same building. The correct answer is no. Correct. Moving VM1 to another subscription does not meet the goal of immediately moving it to a different host. Moving a VM between subscriptions is a complex administrative operation that changes billing and access control, but it doesn't guarantee that the VM will be placed on a different physical host. The VM could end up on the same physical infrastructure even after the subscription move. For planned maintenance, Azure provides specific mechanisms to handle host changes. The proper approaches include using self-service maintenance, where you can trigger maintenance yourself during the self-service window, or allowing Azure to perform live migration to move the VM to an updated host. During planned maintenance, Azure automatically attempts to use live migration to move VMs to different hosts without requiring administrative changes like subscription transfers. Why moving subscriptions doesn't work? Subscription moves are billing and administrative changes, not infrastructure changes. The maintenance notification indicates that the current physical host needs updates, but moving between subscriptions doesn't control physical placement. Additionally, subscription moves can take time and may not be immediate as required. The correct approach would be to use Azure's self-service maintenance feature during the maintenance window to proactively trigger the maintenance and host migration when convenient. Thanks for watching. Hit like, subscribe, and share this with anyone preparing for AZ-104. And don't forget, your practice today is your certification tomorrow.